Pray, for devils have no reason. Satan waits to curse your ways. Have you seen it in his eyes in the sunset? Have you wondered if he's laughing when he plays? This is a set of instructions for how to speak with the devil, which, as those of you with any sort of brains at all might note, that it's a potentially moronic proposition for the face of it, one likely to culminate in any number of thoroughly unpleasant fates. Honestly, it would probably be smarter to publish your credit card number on Facebook, or take a career in crocodile wrestling. But then, that isn't going to stop you, is it? Not if you're sincerely interested, at least. Technically, if you do everything just right, there's a fair chance you walk away scot-free. And that seems to be reason enough for some people to decide that, hey, it's a good idea. Especially if you're the fate-tempting, thrill-seeking, scare-junkie type. Or, I guess, a desperate type. Which brings me to the point of clarification I want to make. This is not a manual for making any kind of Faustian bargain. You know, the whole sell your soul type of deal. Although if you happen to bring it up in conversation, he certainly wouldn't be the one to refuse. Following through would, well, be such a foolhardy bargain. However, it would necessitate removing some of the protections which you will put in place for your conversation. And I don't think I need to spell out for you why that would be a bad idea. If you're really mathematically impaired enough to want to trade something that will last an infinite number of years for something that might last about 90 tops, there are plenty of other rituals out there for you to follow. This one, if performed correctly, should only allow the two of you to talk. This perhaps begs the question of why exactly you want to speak with the devil in the first place. Maybe some of you just like the idea of making small talk with extremely dangerous occult entities. But for the sake of the human race, I hope most of you aren't quite that stupid. Short answer is, he knows things. Things that some of you may have a deep, vested interest in finding out. I mean, he's not omniscient or anything, much as he might like to pretend otherwise. He's not God, but he's definitely got a supernatural advantage over the kind of knowledge any human would be able to obtain. For example, he probably would be able to predict when the next world war will happen, or tell you the cure for cancer, but he could very well be able to predict the winning numbers of tomorrow's $500 million Powerball drawing, or tell you what deadly undiagnosed condition might be afflicting one of your loved ones. Of course, though, the Prince of Darkness doesn't just go around giving out winning lottery numbers to anyone who just asks, and trusting any sort of information obtained from a being commonly described as the father of all lies is probably liable to land you in a worse situation than you were in when you started. However, if you're really dead set on finding something out and you've exhausted all other options, there is a way to get accurate information out of this guy. You see, like so many of the more urban villains in popular culture, the devil has a bit of a penchant for games and gambling. Of course, the reason he likes him so much is that he almost always wins. Unless you happen to be a fiddler named Johnny or being represented by Daniel Webster, you're probably going to get your ass handed to you. But if you're determined enough to want to face the risk and the long odds, there's a certain game the two of you could play to try to win the information you need. First things first, though, we'll start off with a description of the summoning process. Then get into the rules of the game, some tips on how to play, and finally, of course, the inevitable litany of arcane shit that might go horribly wrong. In order to contact your controversial partner, you'll need to go to a church at midnight. It doesn't matter what kind of church, large, small, old or new, liberal or conservative, just as long as you'll be sure it's empty. The last thing you want is for some preacher to walk in on you while you're in the middle of it, for the sake of the preacher's well-being, as much as your own. The process will probably work best if you try it on a new moon, or a full moon, or Friday the 13th, or, well, Halloween. The actual day is less important than the psychological effect it has on you. As long as you don't try it on Christmas Eve or something stupid like that, you should be fine. The time is important, though. You don't have to start or end your ritual exactly at 12 a.m. Greenwich Atomic Time or anything, but as a general rule of thumb, you ought to show up a bit before midnight and have everything set up by no later than 10 or 15 after. Show up a lot before midnight. If you don't know how you're going to get in, shockingly enough, most houses of God do tend to lock their doors at night, at least if no one's there to watch over them. And remember, we want empty. You got it? Now, there are, of course, certain things you need to bring, and certain things you can't bring. For this ritual, you will need a full can of salt. You won't need to use all of it, but it's always better to have more than you need than to have less, right? Then you need 7 candles, red or white, being preferable, something to light the candles with. You'd be shocked how many people forget this. Occult ritual or not, they aren't going to magically light themselves. You'll need a length of red string, rope, yarn, or thread, and then a full-length floor or wall mirror. Ideally, you'll want to find one of these already present in the church. They're a bit unwieldy to be lugging around with you during a break-in, to be honest. However, if there really aren't any there, well, you'll have to bring your own. Now, you might also find it useful to bring some markers, pencils, paper, flashlight, and any sort of tools that might be necessary to secure your entrance into the church. Now, you will not be permitted to bring in any electronic or timekeeping devices. This includes all cell phones, smartphones, tablets, e-readers, MP3 players, PDAs, calculators, wristwatches, pocket watches, kitchen timers, hourglasses, etc., etc., and etc. Seriously, it's worse than the SAT. If you're one of those people that has your smartphone practically wired into your brain, don't worry. You can bring those things with you to church as long as you leave them outside the room in which you'll be doing the ritual. If you brought a flashlight, helpful for finding a way around without attracting unwanted attention, leave that outside too. Also, don't bring in any sort of religious paraphernalia to protect you, especially if it pertains to the Abrahamic religions. And yes, if those gothy black cross earrings you're wearing are hanging right side up, they count. Now, if you have any kind of holy symbols like that with you, the devil will simply refuse to just show up. Don't worry, you're not going in totally unprotected. In fact, most of the supplies with you are not for any sort of devil summoning ritual, but for your own protection. Old superstitions and folk magic remedies to guard oneself from evil. Now, from what I know of, the effect's mostly based on the power of belief, so there are probably numerous other objects, artifacts, and procedures that would work just as well. If you'd like to risk being left helpless at the mercy of the devil in order to test that theory, feel free to experiment. However, for anyone without a psychotic death wish, I'd recommend sticking to the ritual as follows. Now, once you're sure you have all the right supplies with you, make your way into the church and find some place to set up. It could be anywhere from the main sanctuary where services are held to a freaking Sunday school classroom, or a supply closet, I guess, as long as you have a sufficient amount of open floor space and are certain not to be disturbed. Set up your mirror first. This is where the devil will appear when you summon him. As such, you mustn't complete the summoning until you've laid down certain words around it. Now first, surround the mirror with an unbroken circle of salt. If the mirror is hanging on the wall or door, lay down a semicircle around it instead. Make sure that the salt touches the wall at both ends. Then, wrap your red string around the mirror several times. The color red, especially red string, is symbolic of protection in the folklore of many cultures and religions. This is also why red candles are a good idea. Now, speaking of the candles, set them up around the outside of the circle, or semicircle of salt, spaced at relatively even intervals. And no, before you ask, you don't have to get out measuring tape and make it exactly perfect, but do at least try to make it look like as though it was set up by someone old enough to be trusted with matches. Light the candles in a clockwise fashion, being careful not to disturb that salt. If you break the circle, you'll have to start all over again. Once all the candles are lit and burning strongly, your protective wards are complete. You're now ready to actually do the summoning. To do so, you must first get the devil's attention and demonstrate your resolve by performing some sort of sacrilegious act in the holy space. Turning a crucifix or cross upside down is fairly conventional, but it's not the only option. For example, I know of a kid who once fulfilled this requirement by scribbling obnoxious graffiti all over a painting of Jesus hanging in a Sunday school classroom. The nice thing about turning a cross upside down is that once you finish your encounter, assuming you've survived it in one piece, you can just flip it right side up again and no one's the wiser. Sidestepping the relatively minor but still the irritating risk of your Sunday school turning into a reenactment of the Spanish Inquisition for the next month and a half. After you finish doing whatever offensive thing you decide to do, shut down all doors to the room and turn off all the lights so that the space is lit only by the candles. Face the mirror and stare deeply into it, concentrating on your desired outcome. There's no incantations, no arcane strings of Latin you have to recite. Just look into the mirror and wish as hard as you can for the devil to appear. After a few moments of this, when you feel ready, close your eyes and count to 10. Then open them. And if all has gone correctly, you'll no longer even see your own reflection. You'll be looking at the devil, or at least looking at the way the devil has chosen to appear to you. Chances are, he won't look like your conventional red, horned demon with goat legs and a pitchfork, nor any other sort of terrible apparition. No point in scaring you off now, better to lure you in, make you feel safe, really. To that end, he generally takes on the appearance of a fairly average, nondescript human being. If anything, he's prone to vanity and will lean towards the more attractive end of the spectrum. The only really frightening part of him will be his eyes. No matter how hard he tries, he can't hide a sinister gleam smoldering deep within him. The malevolent amusement and hunger, like the eyes of a spider contemplating a fly struggling in its web, they're supremely confident. In those eyes, confident, without pity. Don't look at them too deeply, or you'll begin to feel helpless and paralyzed with dread, losing your hope and your will to fight. Since you'll probably be just standing there staring at him in shock for a few moments, having on some level expected for the ritual to fail, he'll initiate the conversation by asking you what is it you desire from him. If you can gather your wits enough to string together a coherent sentence, you should respond with something like, "I wish to challenge you in a game of question and response." Even if you don't get the words like it, he'll know what you mean, and he'll accept your request with a wide, predatory grin of anticipation. He's been playing this game for a long time, you see, and he's very good at it. Most humans, on the other hand, are really bad. This gives him a chance to, at the very least, thoroughly fuck with your mind. And at most, well, we'll save that for the litany of shit that can go wrong. You'll have to play it and be very smart to avoid justifying his expectations. The general rules to this game are very simple, with a few caveats that can make things a little more complicated. He'll begin by asking you a question. He always initiates the game. Always. It can be anything from a piece of obscure trivia to a riddle or an extremely personal inquiry. Don't worry, you won't be immediately plunged into hell if you get the answer wrong or anything like that. As a matter of fact, he won't even tell you whether you got the answer right or wrong either. After you answer this question, you get to ask him one in return. Now, here's where the consequences of your response can come in. If you answered his last question correctly, he'll respond to your question as honestly and accurately as he is able. However, if your answer is incorrect, he's free to lie as you see fit. Perhaps, if you asked him something you're better off not knowing, he'll tell you the truth about it anyways, to be honest. More likely, he'll feed you the most insidious, damaging lie he can cover up with. Either way, after he's responded, he'll ask you another question, and the process will repeat over and over again until you decide to call it quits. Now, you may be sitting there thinking that it sounds fairly easy to get the information you need. All you have to do is wait for a question you can answer correctly. Then take that opportunity to ask him what you really want to know, ignoring everything else he said. Well, it's not that simple. The devil will never give you an easy question. One that you can be completely sure of the answer to, at least. He may instead give you questions that may have some vague knowledge of, that you think maybe you know the answer to, but aren't really confident, thus forcing you to endlessly second-guess yourself, obsessing over whether or not you can trust the info that he gave you next. Perhaps you'll think what he said was a lie, wish it was a lie, but be eternally consumed by doubt, unable to fully convince yourself that you were wrong, or perhaps you'll be able to make a huge choice based on the information he gave you, and be tormented by fear and indecisiveness as you realize that your fate, and perhaps that of other, rests entirely upon whether or not you were able to correctly recall some arcane piece of trivia that you don't even remember now. You'll never remember the exact questions the devil even asked you, by the way. That would make it too easy for you to go back and check on your responses. Or maybe, instead of testing your knowledge, he'll ask you something personal, something you even lie to yourself about. You'll answer back to him thinking that you've gotten the question correct. No, I didn't resent my sister, or yeah, I would turn the money into the cops, but he'll know better. He'll know better than you that you're lying. And he'll lie to you in return, and you'll believe him. You'll believe him until you're no longer able to deceive yourself, and by then it might just be too late. Or maybe he won't even give you a chance to get an accurate response at all. Maybe he'll just ask you endless strings of completely impossible questions, making you more and more frustrated and disheartened as you realize you'll never be able to force him to tell you the truth. Questions like, what was the exact height of Mount Everest in centimeters in the year 1666? Or what is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow? Although knowing his sense of humor, if he ever asked the latter, he might consider African or European a correct response. There are a couple of ways to short-circuit this particular strategy, however. Additional rules and courses of action that make the game more interesting and prevent you from being stonewalled completely. Although in all honesty, he probably wants for you to try one of those options anyways. The first option is to ask him a riddle instead of a question. If you somehow manage to stump him, and he answers the riddle wrong or gives up, he'll be obligated to give you a truthful response to your next question. But if he answers it correctly, once again, don't worry, he won't pounce on you like a sphinx or drag you into hell. What will happen is that he will get a pass, allowing him to lie in response to one question that would otherwise be obligated to answer truthfully. Honestly, if he gets a pass, you might as well just give up and quit the game right there. It's nearly impossible to determine when he's telling the truth under the best of conditions, adding another layer of complexity by constantly trying to figure out when and if he's used his pass. It's about enough to make any normal person's brain explode. There's just no way. Forget about it. The second option is for you to take a dare from him. If you accept it and vow to follow through, then once again he'll have to answer your next question truthfully. If you choose instead to reject it, he'll get another pass. Now, before you freak out and reject the whole idea completely, you should know that he won't ask you to do anything overly dramatic or unspeakably evil, like blow up a hospital or murder somebody. As a rule of thumb, most dares will involve direct loss of life or any major felonies. It won't bring that into question. However, they certainly won't be easy dares. Inflicting severe pain on yourself, doing something that terrifies the shit out of you, cutting off a treasured relationship, publicly humiliating yourself or someone you love, all these things and more. Things you might not even be able to imagine are completely on the table. Now, if you're willing to go that far, to put yourself in that kind of a position, you'll get your answer. However, if he manages to come up with the one thing you know you simply can or won't do, well, then once again, you might as well just quit. One last thing, don't think you can just tell him you're going to do something and then not do it. If you accept a dare and don't follow through with it, well, let's just say there's going to be consequences. So just suck it up and keep your promise, no matter what the fuck it was. Trust me. You're better off that way. Finally, when you've either gotten to the information you wanted or given up on it completely, you may end the ritual by simply thanking the devil for accepting your request, bowing politely at the waist, and bidding him farewell. The surface of the mirror will seem to swim and flicker for a moment, and then you'll be looking at your own reflection again. Only when you are absolutely certain that you're looking at your own two eyes again may you turn away from the mirror, flick the lights back on, and begin dismantling your protections. Now, and this is important, even if you haven't gotten the information you wanted, you must end the ritual in the manner before 66 minutes have elapsed. Well, I suppose that's technically... Well, you can have 66 minutes and 6 seconds. Subtle, right? I know. But if you're seriously going to try and cut it that close without any kind of timekeeping device, you're probably screwed anyways. I can't emphasize enough how important it is that you keep to this time limit. I'll save the reason behind that for the end, but don't skip ahead. I still got some important tips on how to play this game. Number one, be very careful on what kind of personal info you give out. Try not to talk about yourself, emotions, or problems any more than absolutely necessary. This guy knows human psychology like the back of his hand, and he will get inside your head. It's like talking to Hannibal Lecter. Give him enough to work with, and even if you don't believe a single word he says, he'll still find ways to fuck with you. If anything he asks makes you even remotely uncomfortable, do not hesitate to lie through your teeth. There will be plenty of other questions. Number 2. On a similar note, try to keep the game on track and moving briskly. Unstructured interactions of any kind are to be avoided. Chances are that at some point he'll try to draw you off on a tangent, discussing something that fascinates you, analyzing a response you've given him, or finding some other excuse to speak at length without moving the game forward at all. This is not only a waste of valuable time, but also another excellent opportunity to fuck with you. Number 3. If you choose to give him a riddle, use one you made up yourself. If your riddle has ever been written down anywhere at all, from the pages of The Hobbit to some long-lost tome of ancient magic, he'll know the answer. That said, it has to be a legitimate riddle, with an answer that makes logical sense from some angle. You can't ask something like, what's green, has 10 legs and hops, and then claim, for some inexplicable reason, that the answer was fucking marshmallows. Nor can you ask him a straight question like, what have I got in my pocket? He probably knows that anyways, and there's no hard and fast rule to determine whether a riddle makes sense or not. But you're a reasonable human. Your ancestors ate from the tree of knowledge. Please, for the love of crap, use some common sense. Number 4, if you choose to take a dare, there's a slight chance that the devil will ask you to do something easy, delivering a letter, for instance, or scribbling a 10-digit number on a public restroom stall. If he asks you to do something like that, and you have any shred of common decency in you, don't accept. Chances are he's using you to further some sinister plot, one liable to ruin a lot of lives and harm a lot of people. Who knows? Maybe you're the type of person who really doesn't mind throwing an unknown number of total strangers under a bus to find out what you want to know. But at least be aware that is what you're doing. Number 5, last but not least, be very aware of the time. It might be helpful you do some practicing beforehand and get a feel for how long an hour is without a watch. The devil will probably put off discussing the things you're most keen to find out for as long as he can. And as you near the 66-minute deadline, he'll start trying harder and harder to distract you, captivate you, and otherwise keep you playing until it's too late. He'll string you along, feed you little glimmers of false hope, keep you thinking. Just a few more minutes, I'm almost there. Don't fall for it. Don't go over that time limit, no matter what. Now you might be thinking that this game really doesn't sound all that dangerous. Threats of psychological damage rarely seem to carry the same weight as threats of physical damage, even though their costs are often just as great. Hate to burst your bubble, but the game is far from safe. There are plenty of ways for you to seriously screw yourself over, both physically and mentally, not to mention spiritually. I mean, that's a dead giveaway. And it is with these that I will conclude, in the vain hope that they may make some sort of impression. First, while you are speaking with the devil, Do not let him get out of the sight. Keep staring into the mirror no matter what happens. He'll undoubtedly try various tricks to make you look away. You'll hear noises behind you, feel eyes in the back of your neck, see shadowy phantoms writhing in the depths of the mirror. A cold breath will bow upon you from behind, smelling like the crypt. A deep silence will settle, only to be interrupted by a loud smack directly behind your head, giving you about the worst jump scare you've ever had. Hell, the devil may even abandon a measure of his own dignified facade and give a sudden jump of feigned shock, shouting loudly and pointing behind you with a very convincing shock of terror on his face. Whatever he might test you with, you can't look away from him. If you look away, you lose sight of him completely, even for 1 second. You'll look back in the mirror to find him gone. Well, not really gone, but out of the mirror, in the room, with you. Exactly how much of your body the police will find the next morning and what state it's in will depend entirely on the sort of mood he's in. The same thing goes if you break any sort of protection you laid down at the beginning of the ritual, interrupting the circle of salt, letting the red string unwind, knocking over a candle, or letting one go out. Any of these things will free him from the mirror, and then, well, you're all a bunch of creator horror junkies anyways, right? I'm sure you can fill in the blanks. But on a different topic, you may reach the point in the game, probably after a long series of maddeningly impossible questions, where the devil asks you the deceptively simple question, what is your full name? And you can't give it to him. Names can be a thing of great power, although the devil will, of course, already know your name. Telling it to him yourself is akin to inviting a vampire into your home. Your name is deeply synonymous with your own inner self, thus giving him your name is powerfully symbolic of giving him yourself. If you're foolish enough to make this mistake, all your protections will be for naught, and he'll seize upon your unwitting offer with malicious glee, stealing away your soul and dragging it back with him into hell. At least this way the police will find a complete, identifiable body. As a matter of fact, your vacant shell will be totally unblemished, seemingly having dropped dead of sheer terror. Last but not least, there's a matter of what happens if you go over the time limit. And that's the worst thing you could do. You won't think so at first. The devil gives you no indication that you have in fact exceeded your time limit, and you'll complete the ritual as if nothing had gone wrong. Perhaps as the devil's image in the mirror trembles and gives away, you'll see a particularly nasty, triumphant smirk flash across his face. But this will be easily dismissed as your imagination. You'll turn the lights back on, gather your belongings, leave the room, but when you open the door, you see nothing. That's right, nothing. Just a flat, white void, extending infinitely in all directions. Only the room which was reflected in the mirror will now exist. Incidentally, if you turn back again to face the mirror, you'll catch the last glimpse of your own reflection. Perhaps it will even turn and favor you with a smirk and a cheeky wave before sweeping out the door into a perfectly normal church hallway outside. As you may have already figured out, you yourself are no longer in the church. Your soul is trapped in the mirror, and the devil has taken the liberty of possessing your body. Now that you are no longer using it seems. Pound on the glass and scream all you like, you'll never get out of the room, and no exorcist can help you. But don't worry, it's not like you're in hell, right? At least not necessarily. What you have to understand, see, is that a human soul stripped bare of its flesh is a deeply volatile and vulnerable thing, especially when trapped in the land of the living. You're now an entity of purely mental properties, and as such, the barriers between what is real to you and what is imaginary have been completely dissolved. As you fill that reflected room with your anger, your sorrow, your fear of being trapped, these emotions will begin to coalesce, giving form by your mind. If you're not particularly imaginative, these creatures might not be too terrible, may not be able to inflict too much horror and pain, but with time, you may even be able to teach yourself to get rid of them. If, however, your mind is haunted by monsters, a mind that is vibrantly creative and imaginative can, well, be more than usually twisted. And there's no telling what horrors might come clawing their way out of this maelstrom, tasting sweet release from the confines of your subconscious, hungering for your terror and suffering. They will refuse to be banished, dragging you, kicking and screaming into an endless positive feedback loop of pain and fear. Needless to say, if you're a regular patron of websites like this one, you're probably pretty well fucked. Now, there's one way to find release from the mirror and the world that you've created therein. Let's say that if you call to the devil once more and ask him to free you from the mirror, he'll be willing to take you out. For a fee, of course. Who knows, maybe if your imagination is twisted and powerful enough to create a personal hell that leaves you begging for the real thing, those talents might be put to good use. There are over 7 billion people in the world, after all. Even the devil himself can't be messing with all their minds at once. Talented help is always appreciated. Of course, The corollary to your being trapped inside the mirror is that the devil now gets to do whatever he wants in your body until sunrise, and around that time your body will mercilessly drop dead from the strain of the possession. Autopsy will probably identify the cause as some kind of coronary event, but don't get too relieved, though. He's perfectly capable of stirring up plenty of trouble in those few hours, it may seem. For instance, he may decide to do something big and dramatic, like purchase a large meat cleaver and go on a murder spree, starting with the names in your address book and working his way out to complete strangers if he's got the time, to be honest. Or perhaps he'll focus on one person, someone who trusts you completely, using your persona to get him or her alone and vulnerable, and then, well, no need to describe it here. Once again, I'm sure you can think of a few things. Starting to see why I call this the worst outcome yet? And of course, there's also a chance he won't lay a finger on any of your loved ones. Instead, decide to do something a little bit more subtle, more insidious, like drop off a few nondescript unmarked packages on certain doorsteps in the dangerous part of town. Or locate a particularly dusty, age-yellow text in the storeroom of your local library, and unintentionally misfile it in the young adult literature section. Or whisper 7 very choice words into the ear of a distracted-looking young redhead waiting on the 3 a.m. subway train. Or maybe he'll decide that, in this age of waning superstition, not enough people are getting interested in the game, and the knowledge of them is in danger of being lost. Maybe he'll decide he needs to get the word out a bit more, do a bit of networking, attract some new suckers, or, challengers. Maybe he'll take a quick peek at your browser history, see where the impressionable, curious minds are hanging out these days. Maybe he'll even write a quick tutorial, in modern parlance rather than some inscrutable, obsolete, demonological text, post it on the internet and see how many bites he gets. Well, maybe I shouldn't even have gone there. But if you've made it this far without saying, a little twist at the end isn't going to pull you off, is it, dear reader? I'm sure there are plenty of intrepid adventurers among you with burning questions you like answered, right? And, well, you're all a smart bunch. You know the pitfalls, you know the conventions. You live and breathe this sort of thing, don't you? There's no way you'd fall into any obvious traps, right? Not with some Dick or Jane off the street, after all. You'd be bringing up a whole new level of competition. You would. Oh. Hold on, excuse me for a second. I think somebody's calling me. What? You want out that bat already? Must be one hell of an imagination you got on you. Perfect.